Hello and welcome back to Verbose Mode at Spring IO 2025. My next guest is, I don't want to butcher.
Thorben Janssen.
Thorben.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Thanks for having me.
It's easier than I was afraid of. Thorben, thank you very much and welcome. So let's turn Verbose Mode on and talk about a fascinating topic that you mentioned that your talk was about. And this is how hiding complexity behind abstractions can backfire.
Yeah, I mean, we probably all know that, right? We have something that works totally fine on our test system, and we maybe didn't really know what we were doing when we wrote that code, because we just copied some annotations or extended some superclass because it was done in a different part of our code, or it was recommended on Stack Overflow or nowadays by Claude or some AI tool, and everything seems fine because the entire complexity is hidden behind those superclasses, or more commonly behind those annotations, and we then deploy it to production and it fails horribly. And we discussed that in my talk based on Spring Data JPA, because I'm mostly focusing on persistence technologies, so Hibernate, Spring Data JPA, maybe a little bit Spring Data JDBC, stuff like that. And there we have that quite often. I mean, the entire persistence stuff that we do with Java is usually behind an abstraction.
Java itself is a very high level of abstraction.
Yeah.
Considering how much JIT is doing, there is tons of magic going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And the real question here, so you start with some level of abstraction and say, thank God for having it, because now I don't need to. And you can go from the bottom. I don't need to write machine code.
Which is good.
Which is good. I don't need to write C, which is good.
That's good.
I don't need to write all this JDBC crap from start. This is good.
Yeah.
But in some point of time, you will encounter those kind of problems. And I think you mentioned that most of the problems that you encounter are performance based.
Yeah, usually because just mapping an object to a database table, it's not that complex, right? So that usually works quite well. But then you have situations where you just access a relationship to a different entity, and it seems totally natural in Java to just call a getter method. And it works on your local test system because Spring Data JPA, or to be more precise, the JPA implementation used by it, just triggers a query and fetches the objects from the database.
It sounds a reasonable use case.
Fine, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you do the same thing in production, and you're not fetching those relationships for one or two entities. You do that for a few hundred or thousand.
N+1 problem?
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly it's really slow because something that worked fine on your local system on a small scale just gets totally out of control on a production database.
And here we had the nail on the head. In some point of time, you will encounter a problem that is buried inside this abstraction layer that you relied on, and you will find yourself in a situation in which you need to understand how this abstraction layer works in order to find the problem, troubleshoot the problem, and find the right solution, or work around it, or maybe just give up on this level of abstraction.
Yeah. And there it becomes important that we actually really understand what we are doing. I mean, should be obvious, right? You need to know your tools. At the same time, we all know that there is so incredibly much we are supposed to know, and it gets more and more basically every day, because we're getting more and more abstractions, or those abstractions get more and more powerful and feature-rich. And that means we have to put more and more energy into actually understanding and knowing how that works, and that requires lots of testing, lots of trying, best case, lots of reading or talking with people who can actually share their expertise, like here at the conference.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can come to your talk and learn all about it. But my question is, it's a trade-off, right?
Sure.
In some point of time, you will find yourself digging so deep into this abstraction layer that you'll say, like, why do I even bother?
Yeah. So the first question, of course, is always how much detail do I actually have to need? So
Exactly.
where's the point where it's just good enough? And this is always really hard to answer. I mean, the more users and the more data you have to manage, the more you have to know, the more you have to get into details. And yeah, at some point we might reach the point where we have to ask ourselves, okay, what do I really get out of this abstraction?
Yep.
Is it a good fit for the application I try to build? Does it actually really make my life easier? I would say for most applications, Spring Data JPA is an amazing fit. It improves developer productivity. It maybe even enables us to build an application we would otherwise not be able to build because we need some of those optimizations and abstractions that we more or less get for free. But for other applications that have higher requirements that might be a little bit more special, or where object relation mapping doesn't fit well, we actually have to understand what all those abstractions and features actually get us to then make the educated decision, okay, this is maybe not a great fit, even though it was a great fit for the last 3 applications I worked on. And that is, yeah, always a hard thing to actually achieve.
It actually reminds me a framework that Alexei Shupilov presented, and he is one of those people who work on the internals of JIT and Java compiler and garbage collectors, and he's like really in the weed. And he presented this as a scale with 3 sectors: green, yellow, and red. The green is when you get out of the framework, in his case is the JVM, but it's absolutely the same. It's just a different level of abstraction. Like what you really need to without basically doing anything or doing the minimal stuff that you expected to know when you use the framework.
Yeah.
And that's, for example, in the case of Spring Data, how to avoid the N plus problem. N plus problem is something that everybody encounter, and there are out-of-the-box solutions that are built to avoid it, and all you need to do is kind of read the manual and know how to do it. So that's like the green phase of the optimization. You do what is built in the framework, which you expect to actually do. Then we get into the yellow area of the framework, and this is where you need to start digging. And this is probably what you spoke about in your tool, in your talk, when you actually start kind of digging into the framework. You need now suddenly not only understand how to use it, but also how it works, and then see maybe some more obscure features and flags and start to use them. And then the red one, which is very, very narrow, and only you get there only in a very specific use cases when you say like, well, it doesn't worth it, it's not supported, and working around it is actually harder than just giving it up. And maybe in the case of data, you switch to some lower levels of implementation, maybe Juke,
maybe simple JDBC template with Spring, where you basically take full control over your SQL statements and just send them over JDBC and have a relatively thin abstraction layer that just hides all this JDBC stuff that we actually don't want to bother with, to be honest. Right?
Usually,
we just want to send a SQL statement, get some data back, maybe set a bunch of bind parameters, and that's it. And we get that with JDBC template. And I would say, for everyone who's not happy with the level of abstraction that Spring Data JPA, for example, provides, it's probably a good idea to try out JDBC template in a little bit more than a Hello World application, because there you clearly see what you get from all those abstractions and, let's call it magic, that's happening in the background. Because sure, all of that makes some things more complex for us. We have to know more, but we also get a ton out of it. And you start to think differently about that if you actually try to build something without that level of abstraction. Because you are then suddenly responsible for all the things the framework usually does for you. So yeah. Maybe dipping in both worlds is
so basically until you get to the red area, the framework really works for you, even when you are in the yellow.
Yeah, if you use it correctly.
Yeah.
And the further you get into those yellow zone, the more you have to know. The more you have to know which features to use, which to avoid, when a feature works, and when you actually start to have to work around it, because you're no longer using a default case or something that's covered by the default handling, which might be good enough for 80-something% of the applications, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there are many applications out there who are very happy with this default 80% handling for most of their use cases, but then they have 1, 2, 3 of those where the default handling just is not a great fit. And the good news is most frameworks, Spring Data JPA included, have good solutions for that. You just don't want to use those solutions which are more complex, which require more attention to the detail. You don't want to use those for all of your use cases, because then you're losing all the benefits that you usually get from the abstraction, which is ease of use, developer productivity, standard optimizations that just fit the normal use cases. So yeah, as I said, the further you get into the yellow zone, the more important it becomes to actually understand what's going on.
So I would say we're talking here about expertise in two different aspects. The first is to understand where you are on the scale.
Yeah.
The green zone, the yellow zone, or maybe going to the red zone, which requires a different thinking.
Yeah.
And the second level of expertise is when you are in the yellow zone, what do you do there?
Yeah. And I think the difficult thing for most developers is that it's an iterative process to get those skills to actually identify early, okay, this is an application that will mostly reside in green or yellow, or mostly reside in yellow and red zone. And also to acquire the skills to dive deeper and deeper into those nitty-gritty details of all the features that you get, to actually navigate all the challenges that you face when you are in that yellow zone. So yeah, skills, understanding of frameworks, always was, but I feel like it's more and more important nowadays, especially now that we have lots of AI support when writing code, because everyone who's tried an AI coding assistant knows it's incredibly quick and easy to get a little bit of source code. And if you don't know what you're doing, it looks usually great. And chances are incredibly high that it actually compiles, which is not always a good thing, because it might compile but cause huge issues in production, like the stuff you copied from some random Stack Overflow answer in the past, right?
And that's exactly what my talk was about this morning, about how expertise is critical when working with AI, because you need to actually be able to evaluate what it actually does.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the same conclusion, that you need to have this T-shaped knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? When you know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff, but you really know most of the stuff about one thing that you specialize on, because this is where the expertise and being able to analyze green zone, yellow zone, red zone, and then being able to analyze, I'm in a yellow zone, this is how I do stuff, it really, really becomes critical.
Yeah, and that only works with a skill, T-shaped skill set, because you can't have that expertise everywhere. It doesn't work.
Absolutely.
So within your development team, you have to make sure that you have multiple different T-shaped skill sets.
Oh yeah.
Or maybe get in some external people who support you for a short period of time, which is what I'm often doing for Hibernate, Spring Data JPA.
And this is what we do at TuxCare as well, right? So we provide this external help for making sure that your security patches are up to date. Because this is not your expertise, you don't want to deal with this stuff.
Definitely not.
And we can be this help that you might need here and there. Yeah. So here you have it, folks. T-shaped expertise. It's yet again shines. The AI doesn't absolve us of this. If anything, it becomes even more critical right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.